Georgia is on the trajectory of Russian style of the state capture. Only thing they could not capture is the Georgia people's patriotism and pro-Western aspiration. We want EU, we want NATO membership, and we have a government who serves Russian interests.
Welcome to the Black Sky. My name is Piotr Mateusz Bobołowicz, and today our guest is Ambassador Batu Kutelia, a senior fellow in Foreign Policy Research Institute, former ambassador to the USA, and former head of Georgia's Foreign Intelligence Service, member of the board at the Atlantic Council of Georgia, and professor at the Alte University, Tbilisi and Webster University. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
There is one very hot topic right now in Georgia, and that's a proposed bill on foreign agents. Many people call it a Russian bill because it resembles a Russian bill in which organizations that receive money from abroad need to register themselves as foreign agents. So what's the current situation on it?
Before describing the current situation, a little bit of prehistory of this bill. This bill has been reintroduced this year. It was introduced last year as well, and there was a huge public protest in Tbilisi, and also protests among our international, European, and transatlantic friends. So government had to withdraw this bill. Actually, once last year they withdrew this bill, they kind of admitted that it was not a proper one, and they promised never to reintroduce it. And at that time, it was labeled the Russian bill because the title, as well as the content, as well as the spirit of this law, was strikingly resembling Russian law, which Putin introduced in Russia. Even the name, the agent's law, was exactly followed. And even we had the Georgian government and ruling party leadership with a striking similarity of arguments trying to justify this law, like exactly repeating word by word what was Putin's narrative when he introduced this law, that the agent is nothing to scared of. This word is used in banking or in insurance business, etc. So there was a striking similarity with title, content, spirit, and even arguments to justify. So that's why public unanimously labeled as a Russian law. And this year, we saw that just a few weeks ago, they reintroduced this bill again, only modifying its title, but I think concept-wise that does not change anything in this law. This law, again, has the same concept. This law stigmatizes civil society. This law has a lot of loopholes with a arbitrary application and selective justice system, which unfortunately we have in Georgia, that can progress in the same trajectory as Putin did it in Russia, slowly increasing the application of law, strengthening it to everyone who has a negative or contradictory opinion towards the government or ruling elite. So this is a trajectory of authoritarianism. So notwithstanding the fact that this law last year has not been adopted, and until today it's still in discussion in the parliament, the spirit of this law is in place. As we know, every law has its spirit and the letter. So while letter is not here, but we see the government is determined to push fully this law, spirit already has been there, because we've seen a lot of government accusations of our partners, donors who are contributing for Georgian civil society to do a watchdogging, to do the think tank things, also to provide basic human rights assistance to the Georgian public. They already try to their rhetoric and propaganda neutralize or coerce these actors. Last year, we've seen big campaign accusing USAID in Georgia, staging coup d'etat through their local partners. So all this crazy thing, which again like a copy paste resembles the Kremlin playbook. So now they are trying to formalize it through this law, and again, it was met with a huge public protest. Last 2 days, we've seen hundred of up to 100,000 Georgian citizens marching on the streets and demanding the abolishing of the Russian law. Even the debates in a content of this law also clearly indicates that the government is not willing to engage in substantive discussion with their opponents. They just want to pass it. And also on top of it, we've seen a parallel and never heard of hostility and attacks, verbal attacks on our international partners, like head of the government, prime minister, day before yesterday said that he is willing to have an open debate with diplomats and representatives of our Western countries who are trying to intervene in Georgian domestic affairs through dictating, quote unquote, what laws Georgian parliament should pass. Again, striking resemblance to the Kremlin playbook. And one last component around this law is the context itself, because while they are trying to refer to similar, but definitely it's not similar laws that United States have or some European countries attempted, every our partner directly told them that this law has nothing to do, nothing have in common is the FARA, US legislation, which is tailored for the lobbying of the adversary countries again through the legal entities in US or European Union countries who attempted to have this law, but German Chancellor Scholz personally told Prime Minister of Georgia that European Union is against this type of intimidation or curbing human rights law, and this is not an European law. So again, it's a propaganda war largely because of the high public interest domestically and internationally. But now we see huge anger and dissatisfaction among Georgian publics who resorted to the street protests last 2 days.
And there were even some clashes with police. Do you think those protests can transform into something bigger, some form of revolution, demanding resignation of the government, maybe changing the government, and turning this process of autocratization of Georgia, which we can see since few years?
Yes, that's a very important question. Again, the bigger context, if we zoom out, is that the Georgia is on a trajectory of authoritarianism, and we've seen not only this law but some other measures with the political prisoners, coercing political activists. Every opposition political leader or the media channel is under investigation, scrutiny, also tapping the phones, and several scandals been recently. So Georgia is on the trajectory of Russian style of the state capture, which has been labeled like this by many authoritative and credible Western organizations like Transparency International, Freedom House, and the others. So Georgian democracy is backsliding. We have now some sort of maybe competitive authoritarianism where you might still see the political competition, but the outcome is almost predetermined because every institution is captured by the incumbent and this small group of people affiliated with the Russian-made oligarch Ivanishvili. Another key component also of public anger, because this law really served as a precipitating factor, but the anger been there because of deteriorated economic situation, absence of the transparent and fair judiciary system. Also, we've seen last 3 elections heavily rigged by the incumbent government. So current government has a quasi-legitimacy. They are on the threshold of the legitimacy, and there is slim chances if they conduct proper elections that they will regain or retain the power. And I think that was one of the reasons for them tightening the screws on the civil society, which they cannot control right now. And that, therefore, also, if we flash back to the last year events, there was a lot of people in the streets, and government used disproportionately heavy coercive measures to disperse the public. And this has been a track record of this government. Even some years ago, when Russian MP Gavrilov came to Georgia, they used the rubber bullets and tear gas and disproportionately heavy coercion, and a lot of people been injured while dismissing the public protests. So therefore, I expect that that would be a harsh reaction from the government, especially now their rhetoric shows that they are not willing even to compromise or pull back this law like they did last year. And I think one of the reasons they are attacking our international partners is that to deprive their leverages on them to do some negotiations or to back down from this very dangerous and slippery slope that might lead to the even much bigger scale public dissatisfaction. Concerning the elections, we have elections in October, so just few months ahead of us. So therefore, having extraordinary elections will not be even pragmatically the issue to be demanded on. But the question is that with this type of spirit or intentions or being so unfaithful to their own public, whether this government will conduct free and fair elections in October or not, especially if they will effectively deprive leverages or physical presence of the international monitoring missions, and also if opposition will be under the heavy coercion, especially with this type of law. Well, that's a big question, and that might generate some public dissatisfaction and demand either different way of conducting elections, maybe even forming some type of domestic resistance to institutionally to not let them rig this election. Or another question is the day after question. So provided that the Georgian government is on a trajectory of rigging yet another elections, what will be the public reaction afterwards? Because that might cause again dissatisfaction, that might result Georgia drifting in a position when country will be ungovernable with an illegitimate government with who will consolidate their power in an authoritarian way.
The paradox of Georgian situation is that the president is against those measures. Salome Zurabishvili could be even called by some people a foreign agent.
Yes, so we see the use or application of this word for foreign agent to stigmatize everyone. It's like it was in a Soviet Union. Remember, whoever traveled abroad without KGB approval or was speaking some foreign language was immediately stigmatized and labeled as a foreign agent. So, and I think that's one of the primary reasons, including the president of Georgia, who recently made quite an important step in terms of consolidating Georgian public, especially when, because of the last year's protest, the same agents law protest, there was a one young guy arrested totally on fabricated charges. He was deliberately chosen as a showcase to the other youngsters not to protest. And once he was sentenced by the judicial system controlled by the incumbent and oligarch or informal rule, then president of Georgia used its discretive tool of pardoning and pardoned this young guy. That generated huge anger towards her. I think that was a very important move from the president, notwithstanding that she, as well as the previous presidents, were handpicked by Ivanishvili and GD, but still institutional power remaining at least kind of independent from the government is within her institution, with the presidential institution. But of course, that also generated a lot of pressure and propaganda against her as being also the foreign influence agent or working on foreigners against national interests. In reality, we have a government that does everything against the will of absolute majority of Georgians, who constantly confirming up to 80% that we want EU, we want NATO membership, and we have a government who serves Russian interests in the country and in a wider in the region as well. So therefore, I think the labeling, and the public made a very smart labeling of this law. Yes, they are the Russian agents who are performing Russian interests in this country against the will of majority of this power people.
It really resembles the situation in Ukraine in 2013, when President Yanukovych rejected the agreement with the EU. And do you think it is possible for Georgia to join the EU, to join NATO? And what would it take?
I think Georgia has no other option than joining EU and NATO. I think with Ukrainian bravery, uh, this window of opportunity has been opened to us as well. And Georgia, notwithstanding the government's reluctance to apply for the EU membership, we got a candidacy status. And I think now their attempt to attack our Western partners is directed also not only consolidating their power, but serving Russian interest to derail Georgia from its European path. And missing this window of opportunity could be a biggest tragedy in Georgia's recent history. Therefore, awareness of this is quite big in Georgia. Many people and many analysts label this momentum as Georgia's Yanukovych momentum. There is a similarities. Also, we have a uh, quite evolved tactics of Russian Federation, let's say so. When in Yanukovych case, maybe they misstepped the red line and then got Maidan. In Georgian case, they applied the tactic of boiling the frog, so slowly consolidating the power, avoiding major public backlash. But I think now they are also on the verge, and that was the reason also to test yet another red line, whether this red line is red or not. Exactly the same tactic that Russia applies in international relations with other international actors. So whether they will be successful in this or not needs to be seen. The source of optimism is that anytime they directly confronted Georgia's European aspirations and Euro-Atlantic aspirations, they got huge protests on the streets, whether it was Gavrilov's time when not supporting Ukraine, again, Georgian public went in mass in the streets, and agents law last year, and again, agents law this year. So in which direction this will go, it's hard to make a prediction. The situation is very tense, but of course, with this type of artificially attempted polarization, as if Georgia is split by half, which is not true. Georgia is split by 80%, strongly supporting Western integration, and some 20% and the government and administrative resources that want to drag Georgia into kleptocracy, corruption, and Russian style state capture. So that's the stakes right now. And with kind of recent heavily immigration, the waves of immigration of Russia, which been also flagged as a threat to national security, quite heavy Russian infiltration in government agencies, as well as might be security services. Also, their Georgia's financial attachment to Russia, and we've seen a lot of Russian money being laundered through Georgia, and government being a major partner in this different type of schemes. Well, probability of Russians attempting some kind of let's say unstable development or destabilizing situations in Georgia is also quite possible. And here definitely we need more sharp Western eyes and some attention, not to let Russians to hijack political processes in Georgia.
with Russia losing its influences in Caucasus, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, with many Chechens fighting against Russia in Ukraine, mm, do you think that Russia could attempt some invasion or some military operation in Georgia, maybe with acceptance of the government, maybe requested by the government mm, to not let Georgia go?
Well, I think that scenario is less probable because Russia, as I said, already is exercising quite an effective state capture in Georgia. Only thing they could not capture is a Georgia people's patriotism and pro-Western aspiration. So, more realistic is for them to try to attempt some kind of destabilization. For example, it's a bit an extreme case, but still one area to keep eye on is some template of Montenegro case, which they were not successful at that time in 2016 before Montenegro joined NATO. But with Georgia's strategic location, and we often say that Georgia is more than Georgia in that equation, these probabilities are rather high. For example, Georgia is now one of the key countries that helps comprises this so-called the middle corridor and the key country that connects Black Sea region to the Caspian region in Central Asia. So in Central Asia, there is also very big alert of the Russians' ambition or aggressive ambitions towards them, and also they are seeking their independence with the logistic supply chains to attach to the European market. So controlling Georgia would be a very significant tool for Russia to dictate their own terms to the Central Asian countries, even Azerbaijan and Armenia, because Georgia is viewed as a outlet to the Europe for South Caucasus countries as well. Therefore, for Russia to achieve their wider strategic goal in the region, it's important to have a stronghold on Georgia. So far, because of the state capture and because of the pro-Russian government, they are well positioned. But what would be the degree of their, let's say, greediness to finalize their state capture? That needs to be seen, and we need to keep a sharp eye on their activities and also deprive them the ability to create this artificial polarization and then destabilize situation in Georgia. Therefore, we often are asking our Western partners as well to increase their physical presence and their policies, sharpen their policies towards us as part of the regional Black Sea security policy as well, because that would allow to deploy more resources, not to let Russia create some kind of a political anti-access area denial for the Western democracies.
Because of the war, avoiding mobilization, but not only just avoiding the war, many Russians fled to Georgia. And as I heard, they are not really welcomed there. How is the situation? What do Georgians think about Russians coming to Georgia? And what do they think about the war in Ukraine?
Yes, one of the bigger concern was also the big number of the Russian citizen inflow. As I said, it should have been a national security issue. Unfortunately, we don't see that Georgian government maintains some kind of control, even collecting biometric data or working with the partners to find the identities of different individuals. Just recently, we've seen Georgia was part of the big scandal of this Havana syndrome investigation, where one of the attacks on the U.S. diplomat happened in Georgia, and the actor was the Russian person who was a family member of the Russian GRU military intelligence unit head, who is responsible for this acoustic or whatever weapon they are possessing. So that's a tip of the iceberg, but you can presume how big is the Russian infiltration. So all this information combined with the obstruction of the domestic market economy by huge inflow of Russia and Russian money, increase of prices. Also, Russian arrogance and trying not to admit that Russia is a culprit in Georgia as well, with occupying 20% of our territory. That really generated quite a strong social backlash against them. You could see in Tbilisi a lot of graffitis supporting Ukraine and a lot of anti-Russia graffitis. And these are the ordinary people who are trying to protest and express this protest why Russians are not welcome. Plus also the Russian economic impact as well, because huge inflow of Russian money, which I think is rather toxic money, created inflated prices on starting from the property or the basic commodities, and that's also generated the anger. So now recently we've seen a tendency of some of those Russians who infiltrated first and second wave of migration. They are leaving Georgia right now. There was several media reportings for the reasons why they are reporting. I think the reasons are combination of all of those reasons I just listed.
Just one last question. Why is government keeping ex-president Mikhail Saakashvili imprisoned, and how long do you think, or do you think maybe they will let him go just to gain some influence or improve relations with the West?
I think imprisonment of President Saakashvili is a very effective polarizing tool for the government, and not only for the government. I think his imprisonment is largely managed by Moscow. And it's also quite an effective tool for the goals that I described earlier, to see the polarization within society because of a big number of his supporters, and also some kind of political messaging to local population that they can have political prisoners. They don't care about the external pressure, and also to our international partners as well. So I think that this his imprisonment is part of bigger operation and part of the Russian Kremlin playbook style of state capture in Georgia. So I don't see that he will be released by government, or they applying some kind of a goodwill gesture on the humanitarian basis, which many international partners been requesting from them. Plus, also president of Georgia, as with this young guy Lazare Grigoriadis, which I described earlier, who's been pardoned. President can apply the pardoning, but as an insurance, government keeps some other open cases against Saakashvili. So technically, as lawyers say, as soon as if President Zurabishvili pardons President Saakashvili, then the government and its prosecutor's office, which is again part of the party-controlled or informal rule of Ivanishvili, they will reintroduce other charges to keep him in jail anyways. So that's a legal complication behind it. But the most important is the political reasoning why he is in jail.
Thank you very much. I hope we'll have a chance to speak again after the elections to summarize, and maybe something will change.
Hopefully, because Georgia really needs change for good and for its European and Euro-Atlantic future. So thank you for your questions, and look forward to staying in touch.